June 7th, 2001. Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary celebration at Madison Square Garden. The crowd roared as legends took the stage. Diana Ross, Whitney Houston, Usher. But when Elizabeth Taylor walked out to introduce Michael, something shifted in the room. She stood at the microphone, 76 years old, still commanding every eye, and said something that made people uncomfortable. She called Michael the most loyal friend she'd ever had. She said he understood her in ways nobody else could. And watching from backstage, according to people who were there that night, Michael was crying. Most people didn't understand their friendship. The tabloids called it strange. Critics called it publicity. Skeptics suggested it was transactional, two fading stars propping each other up for relevance. But what almost nobody talked about was this. Elizabeth Taylor and Michael Jackson were two of the most famous, most scrutinized, most misunderstood people on the planet. And in each other, they found something increasingly rare in their lives. Someone who knew what it felt like to live in a cage made of cameras and expectations. This isn't a story about celebrity gossip, it's a story about isolation. About what happens when fame becomes so overwhelming that normal human connection becomes impossible. And about two people who found refuge in each other, not because they were similar, but because they understood the weight of being constantly watched, constantly judged, constantly alone, even in rooms full of people. The friendship began in the early 1980s, but the groundwork was laid decades earlier. Elizabeth Taylor was born in 1932 in London, moved to Los Angeles as a child, and by age 12 was already a movie star. National Velvet made her famous. A Place in the Sun made her iconic. By her 20s, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, according to magazines and studio executives, and millions of fans who'd never met her but felt they owned a piece of her life. She married young, divorced, married again. By the time she met Michael Jackson, she'd been married 7 times, including twice to Richard Burton, a relationship so volatile and public it played out like a soap opera in newspapers worldwide. Michael's trajectory was different but parallel. Child star at age 8, global phenomenon by 11. The Jackson 5 made him famous, but he was never allowed to be just one of the brothers. He was the lead, the face, the one everyone watched. And by the time he was a teenager, he'd already spent more time on stage than most adults spend in a lifetime of work. He'd already learned that privacy was a luxury he'd never have. They met, according to Elizabeth, at a dinner party in the early 80s. She was there with one of her husbands. Michael was there as a rising solo artist, Thriller not yet released, but off the wall, already establishing him as more than just a former child star. They didn't talk much that night, but Elizabeth later said she noticed something in Michael's eyes. A kind of exhaustion she recognized. The look of someone who'd been performing their entire life and didn't know how to stop. The real friendship began after Elizabeth's first stay at the Betty Ford Center in 1983. She'd gone there for addiction to painkillers, a dependency that developed after years of chronic pain from injuries sustained during film shoots. The admission was public, humiliating, career-threatening. Most of Hollywood distanced themselves, either out of judgment or discomfort. Michael Jackson sent flowers and a note. It said something simple, that he understood, that he was there if she needed to talk. Elizabeth called him. They talked for hours. And according to Elizabeth, that phone call was the beginning of the most important friendship of her life. What they shared wasn't just fame. It was the specific kind of loneliness that comes with being public property. Elizabeth had been a star for over 40 years by the time she and Michael became close. She'd lived through the studio system, where actors were owned by their employers, where every aspect of their lives was controlled and marketed. She'd been married in front of cameras, divorced in front of cameras, mourned the death of her third husband, Mike Todd, in front of cameras. When she fell in love with Richard Burton, married at the time to someone else, the scandal was international news. Newspapers called her a homewrecker. Religious groups condemned her. And through it all, she was expected to keep working, keep performing, keep being Elizabeth Taylor. Michael's experience was different in specifics, but identical in essence. He'd grown up with cameras following him. Interviews where journalists asked inappropriate questions. fans who screamed and fainted and sometimes got hurt in the crush to get close. By the time Thriller made him the biggest star on the planet in 1983, he couldn't go anywhere without disguises. Couldn't eat at a restaurant. Couldn't walk down a street. His life existed in three places: on stage, in the studio, and in his home. Everything else was too dangerous, too exposed. People who study isolation talk about something called the goldfish bowl effect. It's the psychological impact of being constantly observed, of having every action scrutinized, of never being able to relax into normalcy because there's always someone watching, always someone ready to judge. Elizabeth and Michael lived in goldfish bowls, and when they talked, when they spent time together, the bowls temporarily disappeared. Their friendship deepened through the late 80s and into the 90s, but it was built on something darker than most people realized. Both of them dealt with chronic pain. Elizabeth's back had been injured multiple times during film shoots, particularly during the making of National Velvet when she fell from a horse, and again during Cleopatra. By her 50s, she was in constant pain. The medications prescribed to manage it became a dependency. She'd go to rehab, get clean, and then the pain would return and the cycle would start again. Michael's pain was different but equally real. The intense choreography he performed took a toll on his body. By the late 80s, he was reportedly dealing with chronic back problems, joint issues, and injuries from years of dancing at a level few people could sustain. And like Elizabeth, he was prescribed painkillers. And like Elizabeth, the line between medical necessity and dependency became blurred. They talked about this. According to people close to both of them, their phone conversations often revolved around pain. Not in a complaining way, in a matter-of-fact way. They understood that living in constant physical discomfort changed you, made you irritable, made sleep impossible, made normal life feel unmanageable. And they understood that admitting to pain, admitting to needing help, was seen as weakness in an industry that demanded perfection. There's a story, reported by several people who knew them, about a night in the early 90s when Elizabeth called Michael at 3 in the morning. She was in pain, couldn't sleep, and didn't want to be alone. Michael drove to her house in Bel Air. They sat in her living room and talked until dawn. About nothing important. About movies and music and things they missed about normal life. And when Michael left, Elizabeth told her assistant that he'd just saved her life. Not literally, but from the kind of loneliness that makes you feel like you're disappearing. The relationship became more complicated in 1993 when Michael faced the first accusations of child sexual abuse. The details of the Chandler case are well documented. A 13-year-old boy, through his father, accused Michael of inappropriate behavior. The case became a media circus. Michael maintained his innocence. The investigation was invasive and humiliating, including a strip search where police photographed his body. Eventually, the case was settled out of court for a reported sum between $15 and $25 million. Michael's reputation was damaged. His image shifted from eccentric genius to suspicious figure. Most of Hollywood distanced themselves, not necessarily because they believed the accusations, but because association with Michael became professionally dangerous. Sponsors pulled out. Projects got canceled. People who'd called themselves his friends stopped calling. Elizabeth Taylor didn't. She went on television and defended him, loudly, on multiple occasions. She told interviewers that she knew Michael, that the accusations were false, that he was being destroyed by people who wanted his money. She said the Michael Jackson she knew was gentle, kind, and incapable of harming a child. Her defense was controversial. Some people respected her loyalty. Others accused her of enabling. Critics said she was blinded by friendship, unable to see what was obvious to everyone else. But Elizabeth didn't back down. In interviews from that period, she's visibly angry when discussing the allegations. She called the media coverage a lynching. She said Michael was being crucified for being different. Here's where the story gets more complicated. Because Elizabeth Taylor's defense of Michael raises questions that don't have clean answers. Was she right? Was Michael innocent, as he always claimed? Or was Elizabeth's judgment clouded by her own experiences of being misunderstood and attacked by the media? It's impossible to know with certainty. The case settled before trial. No criminal charges were filed at that time. But the allegations resurfaced in 2003 with a different accuser, leading to a trial in 2005 where Michael was acquitted on all counts. What we can say with certainty is this: Elizabeth believed in Michael's innocence. Whether that belief was based on genuine knowledge or on her need to see him as innocent, we can't know. What's documented is that her defense of him was unwavering, and that Michael, in the darkest period of his life, had at least one person with significant public influence who stood by him. The cost to Elizabeth was real. She received death threats, hate mail. Her reputation, already complicated by her personal life, took another hit. Some people accused her of putting friendship above truth. Others suggested she was desperate for relevance, attaching herself to Michael's scandal for attention. She ignored all of it. In a 1993 interview, she said something revealing. She said that real friendship means standing by someone when everyone else walks away, and that if she was wrong about Michael, she'd rather be wrong than abandon him. The dynamic between them shifted after 1993. Michael became more dependent on Elizabeth, and Elizabeth became more protective of him. People who observed them together during the mid to late 90s described a relationship that had evolved from peer friendship to something closer to maternal. Elizabeth was older, had survived multiple scandals, and had a kind of toughness Michael lacked. She advised him, scolded him when she thought he was making bad decisions, tried to shield him from people she believed were taking advantage of him. Michael, according to those close to him, trusted Elizabeth in ways he trusted almost nobody else. He called her frequently, sought her advice on everything from business decisions to personal relationships. When he married Lisa Marie Presley in 1994, a marriage many viewed as a publicity stunt to rehabilitate his image after the allegations, Elizabeth was reportedly one of the few people Michael consulted beforehand. She attended the wedding, publicly supported the union, and when the marriage fell apart less than 2 years later, she was one of the people Michael turned to. But there were tensions. Elizabeth reportedly grew frustrated with Michael's increasing isolation, with his decision to settle the 1993 case rather than fight it in court. With the people he surrounded himself with, many of whom she believed were enablers or worse. She tried to intervene, tried to convince Michael to be more aggressive in defending himself, to stop hiding, to fight back against the narratives being built around him. Michael, according to accounts from people close to him, resisted. He didn't have Elizabeth's combative nature. He wanted to retreat, to build walls between himself and the world. Neverland Ranch became his fortress, a place where he controlled every variable, where he could create the childhood he'd never had, where the outside world couldn't reach him. Elizabeth understood the impulse, but she worried that isolation would destroy him. There's a moment from 1997 that encapsulates both the depth of their friendship and its limitations. Elizabeth threw a party at her Bel Air estate, a small gathering, maybe 20 people. Michael was there, one of the few public events he attended during that period. According to people who were present, Michael spent most of the evening in a corner, barely speaking to anyone except Elizabeth. At one point, she pulled him onto the dance floor. People watched, expecting him to dazzle them, to be the Michael Jackson they remembered. But he didn't dance. He swayed awkwardly, uncomfortable, self-conscious. And Elizabeth, trying to lighten the moment, made a joke. Something about how he needed to teach her the moonwalk. Michael didn't laugh. According to witnesses, he looked at her with an expression that was almost pleading. And then he left the party, just walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. Elizabeth followed him outside. They talked in the driveway for nearly an hour. Nobody knows what was said. But when Elizabeth came back inside, someone asked if Michael was okay. Her response, as reported by multiple people who were there, was quiet and sad. She said, "I don't think Michael is ever going to be okay again." The friendship continued through the 2000s, but it was marked by Elizabeth's growing concern and Michael's increasing withdrawal. In 2001, they appeared together at Michael's 30th anniversary concert at Madison Square Garden. Elizabeth's introduction of Michael that night was emotional, almost desperate. She praised him, defended him, called him a humanitarian and a genius. But there was something in her delivery that felt less like celebration and more like protection. Like she was trying to remind the world of who Michael was before the scandals, before the bizarre headlines, before the image that had come to overshadow the talent. Michael's performance that night was strong by some accounts, weak by others. He hit his marks, did some of the signature moves, but people who'd seen him perform in the 80s and 90s said something was missing. The energy, the joy, the sense that he was exactly where he belonged. He looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and when he left the stage, Elizabeth was waiting in the wings. They embraced, and according to people backstage, Michael whispered something to her. She nodded, held him tighter. The 2003 allegations hit Michael harder than the 1993 case. This time, he was arrested, booked, fingerprinted. The images were broadcast worldwide, and this time, there would be a trial. Michael hired a legal team, prepared to fight, and Elizabeth, now in her 70s and dealing with her own health issues, stood by him again. She didn't testify at the trial, but she made public statements supporting him. She called the prosecution unjust. She said Michael was being persecuted. The trial lasted 5 months. In June 2005, Michael was acquitted on all counts. The prosecution's case had fallen apart. Witnesses contradicted each other. The Arvizo family's credibility was destroyed under cross-examination. Michael was legally vindicated, but the cost was devastating. He left the United States shortly after the verdict, moving to Bahrain, then Ireland, avoiding the country that had made him the most famous person on earth, but had also put him through 2 separate abuse investigations and a criminal trial. Elizabeth tried to reach him during this period. According to people close to her, she called repeatedly, left messages, tried to convince him to come home, to rebuild his life, to fight for his legacy. But Michael was done fighting. He stayed away. And when they did speak, Elizabeth reportedly found him distant, paranoid, convinced that people were plotting against him, that his phones were tapped, that he couldn't trust anyone. The last time they spoke was reportedly in early 2009. Michael had returned to the United States and was preparing for a series of comeback concerts in London. 50 shows at the O2 Arena, titled This Is It. It was supposed to be his return, his chance to prove he could still perform at the highest level. Elizabeth, according to reports, was skeptical. She worried about his health, worried about the people organizing the concerts, worried that Michael was being pushed into something he wasn't ready for. She called him. They talked. And according to sources close to Elizabeth, the conversation didn't go well. She asked if he was taking care of himself. He said yes, but she didn't believe him. She asked if he was sleeping. He said he was working on it. She asked if he was using medication to sleep. He got defensive. Told her not to worry. Told her he had everything under control. Elizabeth reportedly didn't push. She'd learned over the years that pushing Michael only made him retreat further. So she told him she loved him, told him to be careful, and they hung up. She would never speak to him again. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died in his Los Angeles home from acute propofol intoxication. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had been administering the surgical anesthetic to help Michael sleep. The dose that night was fatal. Michael's heart stopped. Paramedics couldn't revive him. He was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. Elizabeth Taylor was at home when she got the news. According to her assistant, she screamed, then went silent. She didn't release a public statement immediately, didn't talk to the press. For 2 days, she stayed inside her house, refusing visitors, refusing calls. When she finally spoke, it was through Twitter, a brief message. I am devastated. My heart is broken. I have lost one of my best friends. The funeral was private, but Elizabeth's grief was public. In the weeks and months after Michael's death, Elizabeth gave several interviews about their friendship. And in those interviews, something became clear. She blamed herself, not for his death directly, but for not doing more, for not being more insistent, for not finding a way to save him from the people she believed had enabled his worst impulses. She talked about the phone calls at 3 a.m, the hours-long conversations about nothing and everything, the shared understanding of what it meant to live under constant scrutiny. She said Michael was the only person in her life who never wanted anything from her except her presence. who never tried to use her fame or her connections, who just wanted to talk, to be understood, to not feel alone. And she said something else, something that cuts to the heart of their entire relationship. She said that Michael spent his whole life trying to be perfect for everyone except himself, that he gave everything to his fans, his family, his art, and left nothing for his own survival, and that she'd watched it happen and couldn't stop it. Elizabeth Taylor died on March 23, 2011, less than 2 years after Michael. Congestive heart failure. She was 79 years old. In her final months, according to people close to her, she talked about Michael often, wondered where he was, whether he was at peace, whether he'd forgiven her for not doing more. So what do we make of this friendship? What does it tell us? On the surface, it's a story about two icons who found solace in each other. But underneath, it's darker. It's a story about how fame isolates, about how being constantly watched makes real human connection almost impossible, about how two people can be surrounded by millions of admirers and still be desperately, crushingly alone. Elizabeth Taylor and Michael Jackson weren't friends because they had similar interests or backgrounds. They were friends because they recognized each other's loneliness, because they understood what it meant to be public property, to have every relationship questioned, every motive analyzed, every moment scrutinized. And they were friends because they shared something else, a relationship with pain, both physical and psychological, that required management. Elizabeth was open about her struggles with prescription medication. Michael was less open, but the evidence suggests he dealt with similar dependencies. They understood what it meant to need help just to function, just to sleep, just to get through the day, and they didn't judge each other for it. But here's the tragedy. Their friendship, as deep as it was, couldn't save either of them. Elizabeth couldn't pull Michael out of his isolation, couldn't protect him from the accusations that destroyed his reputation, couldn't stop him from surrounding himself with people who may or may not have had his best interests at heart. And Michael couldn't give Elizabeth what she needed most in her final years. Someone who was present. Someone who wasn't drowning in their own demons. There's a photograph from the early 90s. Michael and Elizabeth at some event sitting next to each other. They're not looking at the camera, they're looking at each other. And the expressions on their faces are almost identical. Tired, guarded, but with a hint of softness that suggests, just for a moment, they don't have to perform. They can just be. That photograph might be the most honest representation of their relationship. Two people who found a brief refuge in each other, who understood each other's pain in ways nobody else could, but who ultimately couldn't escape the weight of the lives they'd built and the expectations that came with them. If there's a lesson in this story, it's not a comforting one. It's that fame at the level Elizabeth and Michael experienced doesn't just change your life, it warps it, makes normal relationships impossible, turns every connection into a transaction, even when you desperately want it to be real. And sometimes, even when you find someone who understands, someone who sees you for who you actually are, it's not enough. The damage is too deep, the isolation too complete. Michael Jackson and Elizabeth Taylor gave the world extraordinary art, films and music and performances that will outlive everyone reading this. But the cost of that art for both of them was a kind of loneliness most people can't comprehend. A loneliness that only deepened as they got older, as the world moved on, as their bodies broke down and their reputations became complicated and their relevance faded. They found each other in that loneliness, held onto each other through scandals and pain and loss. But in the end, it wasn't enough to save either of them, because some kinds of loneliness can't be fixed by friendship. Some kinds of damage can't be healed by understanding. Sometimes all you can do is sit with someone in the darkness and be grateful you're not facing it completely alone. And maybe that's what their friendship was. Not a solution. Not salvation. Just two people, impossibly famous and impossibly isolated, making each other's loneliness slightly more bearable for as long as they could.